Welcome to United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America on WSGW. Now, here is your host, Kareem Bowen.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America. I almost didn't get that out today, guys. I thought I was going to eat those words before they actually came out, but it's great to be here with you guys. I'm in the studio today with our producer, John B. in the place to be. John, what's good with you?
Hello, hello.
Hello.
Yes.
Amen. And then we also have with us, we got Mark, my reoccurring co-host. He's the most hostess with the mostest to my right. What's going on, Mark?
Hey now.
Hello.
Hey now.
We're trying out different introductions.
Is that what it is? Okay.
That's from some show. Hey now.
Hey now. Give me another one.
Hey, you guys.
What was the name of the movie? It was Good Morning Vietnam.
Good Morning Vietnam with Robin Williams.
With Robin Williams.
Yeah.
Oh, I absolutely love that. The way he signed on to every single show. So when you said that, hey, you guys, that's the first thing that came to mind. Anyway, so how have you guys been doing? How are you guys making the transition into new weather and new seasons and things of that nature?
My sinuses are trying to kill me.
You have allergies?
I don't know what it is, but the changing temperatures, and then we got warm again, and then we got cold again. It's just, it's bothering me.
I tell you, that's exactly what happens when I wake up, and I don't want to say it on the air, but I get really watery, and so I end up just with gobs of stuff coming out of me, clear stuff all over the place, all of that fun, good stuff. I was talking with somebody, and this is a real thing, and so I don't want to. I was kind of like, what? This lady told me I got a call from her sister, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, we make sure that you let everyone know, give prayers for my sister." And I'm like, well, what's going on? And she said that her sister had actually gone in for another booster shot. And a couple days later, now she's like on life support.
Wow.
Yeah, she had some reaction to it or whatever.
Booster?
That's the story.
Booster, by the way.
That's the story. I got my first booster, but I was like, I ain't getting no more injections at this point. You know what I mean?
I got the first two. I'm not doing them anymore.
Yeah, I think, did I get the first two? I got one. I got one booster, and I was like, I'm not feeling getting any more boosters or anything right now. So, and I've been doing pretty good. I guess the thing that we were hoping would never happen happened when my mom got COVID, and so it's kind of like, she survived, so we're good.
Well, at this point, it's far less fatal than it used to be.
And that's the thing.
So.
That's the key for me. So now we got it. Everyone's not, I mean, the numbers are still 400 people a day, but that is not, 100,000 people a day or whatever it is. But it was interesting. But I wanted to get in today's show. You guys are going to kill me. And I know we were talking before show, like Kareem sends us these provocative questions, like in 15
minutes before the show.
25 minutes before
Holy
the show.
Cow.
This is intentional because I wanted us to be able to.
Don't lie. You
good afternoon.
Good
afternoon. No, if you look at these questions, these are top questions. I wanted us to be able to have a conversation, and oftentimes when we get things too soon, we kind of like start thinking like, how do I feel? What do I really?
How do I delicately answer that?
Yeah, especially you, Mark, and Mark, he'll start shooting off. One thing, and I think that people that it's funny. Someone said to me, Mark, they were like, we see how you guys get along. They're like, Jonathan, they think that your answers are well thought out. I was like, whatever. But they're like, we see how you and Mark get along because you and Mark kind of pretty much say what you're thinking right off the cuff. And I like that. And I think that many times when we deal with people, that's usually what we deal with. We don't have an opportunity to give, 20-minute thought to a question in the moment or how we're going to respond to something. We just respond to it. And I think those are sometimes the best opportunities. And then we get to go back and look at, I can't believe I said that, or we that a little different, or we start seeing the stream and what people are saying, like, whoa. Let us explain. So today we're going to just talk about how we see race. And I want us to have just a really honest conversation on this. And I think this conversation and conversations like these are going to be so important, considering where we are as a nation, so divided. The Roe v. Wade thing has divided people. January 6th has divided people. Election seasons have divided people. And so it's important for us to make sure that we're able to have I think these tongue-in-cheek conversations where we can just be very honest and just talk about these things. So I hope you guys are open for the journey today. And if you're out there in social media land, or if you're someone who knows me, then you probably know that during this time I'm usually on the radio. So please, no text calls or anything of that nature.
Well, just turn yours down, man.
Yeah. What'd you say?
Turn yours down.
Usually we come into the studio and I hear ding. I'm like,
it's on me. I'm usually right before the show. Turn your phones on.
It's your fault. You're the producer.
Off.
You're supposed to make sure that we're on top of these things.
Yep.
But let's get into this conversation. I want to first of all start talking just by asking the question, where are we in terms of issues of race at this particular moment? How do we feel? We've talked a lot about race in different, and from different lights and different things. But where do you guys feel that you are in terms of race and the issues that we're discussing and the things that we've had to kind of digest?
Wow. That's a pretty broad, open-ended
That
question.
is an open, and that's what it was meant to be.
Well, say a little more if you don't mind. What are you looking
well, I mean,
for?
are you guys comfortable in terms of these conversations?
Are we talking like in our personal lives?
Yeah, personally,
or like as a
am I gonna
society?
ask
Well, no, as a country, as a society.
Where are you guys?
Yeah, so
Okay.
In your own persona?
So now I understand what you're asking.
He, him. How do you guys?
As I think you know, Kareem, individually, like off, between you and I or whomever else, privately.
Mark, you're gonna get yelled at because you're supposed to be speaking within,
sorry.
closer to the mic.
Sorry. I have no issue being really transparent and saying exactly what I think and what I feel. I think in this forum, a public forum, I have to be a little more guarded with how I say it or what I say.
Thank you, Larry. Larry said he's comfortable. Why you have to be more guarded?
Because I think as we've talked before, at least in my point of view, there's very little upside and a lot of downside for me expressing my opinion as a white male, because things get easily misinterpreted or expanded on, and you're quickly viewed as something at least you don't think you are.
Well, I think that would be very true. If you were not warranted. Now you sit next to the blackety black man of the hour. You know what I mean? I'm continually pointing out issues that are, of injustice for Black America. But I know your heart. And so we have created, and hopefully we're creating a space where we can have those difficult conversations. And the viewers may not always like it. But I think that if we are able to kind of make our way through the conversation, that is different. And I know that people can hear things and be upset or whatever. But one of the things that we said we would do that when we had this was to be honest.
Yep.
And to really just kind of be honest with where we are and speak our truth on those things. And we would kind of cover each other if the idea, if we're understanding that we're here to get a better understanding of what we're going to say. What are you thinking, John?
So in the we're talking about how we feel about race as individuals and how we generally approach it.
Absolutely.
And in the interest of transparency, because that's what we're talking about, I'll share a story about what happened literally last week.
Okay. Great.
And I didn't want to.
Let me know if I need to beat somebody up or what's going on.
No.
No, I'm just joking.
I think that me personally and the group that I generally talk to, we're pretty irreverent of race. We approach it with humor. We don't approach it with, and it's not insulting humor necessarily, but it's just kind of one of those, it's a thing to be discussed and laughed about.
Right.
So I was in the gas station the other day and I saw a box of spooky Twinkies. Have you seen these?
No.
Okay, here's a picture of them. The only difference
is they're black.
Oh my goodness. Is
chocolate.
this real?
That's real. You can go across the street to that gas station and see it. And I saw those. I'm like, am I racist or is this racist?
You got to see this. Hopefully you guys can see this. This is what a spooky Twinkie looks like. But I think this is going to take us. This is the thing, and that is racist. That is very racist.
Okay.
But we're gonna talk about it because I think that brings us to a place.
Can I just build on something he
Absolutely,
said? I love
go
the fact that you guys, and I don't know who you're associating with, are treated with humor, because I do think in this day and age, a lot of people are taking things way too seriously. And I always, one of my favorite comedians was Dave Chappelle. I loved his weekly sitcom or his comedy hour or comedy show.
The Dave Chappelle show.
Dave Chappelle show.
Rocks, right?
And it was all about racial stereotypes. And he poked fun at every racial stereotype black or white, and he would be white face, and that's okay. But but everybody could laugh at that, and it's just interesting that I think we all tend to take ourselves a little too seriously, and we need to take a step back and not do that. Because again, back to my premise, we're all human beings, irrespective of race, and at our core, we really want the same things, I think.
All right, great. Stacey Crosby, you started a question. Okay, there we go. Why couldn't it be orange or white? That's what I'm thinking. If I'm thinking,
well, it's always white, so it can't be scary if it's the same.
It's golden. When I think about Halloween, the color that comes to mind is orange.
Orange. That would have been a good one.
I don't know if I would have eaten them, but because
I like those orange cupcakes that Hostess has.
I don't like eating orange dye. I just don't. Orange and red kind of scare me. But that's what I was saying. It's normally it's yellow, but that's what I was saying. So Hostess, we got a whole nother conversation.
I like orange cupcakes, man.
Well, I saw that and I sent it to my friend. I'm like, what's spooky?
John,
about
you
this?
should have said that to me. I would have been on the phone with Hostess at 2 p.m. this afternoon.
And I'm thinking, am I racist for thinking this? Is this racist?
But I think, but I think I'm gonna make sure that comes up again, because that's a perfect example of how of things that I think about, and that's why I say that if we're gonna have conversations, let's have honest conversations, because there was actually a group of people that sat down. That wasn't one man's decision or one person's decision.
Well, that went pretty far up.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
This is a whole marketing campaign
for those listening on radio. They're chocolate, so they're obviously a much, much, much darker color than normal Twinkies,
and so they're scary.
So they're
Twinkies.
spooky.
Yeah. And even the word spooky Twinkies.
Does it say spooky Twinkies?
It says spooky Twinkies.
See that
was a bunch of white people sitting in that room doing that.
And what I'm saying is that oftentimes I think people are tone deaf. Now, did someone in the room? No one in the room had enough wherewithal to say, like, should we use the word spooky and paint the two Twinkies chocolate or brown or black or whatever you want to call? Those are the types of things that I think that oftentimes we don't think about that could easily be taken as aggressive statements by entities. But anyways, I want to thank you, John, for really just taking my breath away.
Thanks for justifying that I'm not the bad guy.
No, you are not the bad guy. All right, so let's talk, because a lot of times people want to know kind of like where we are and what we think. And Stacey, I know she's breathing. You're breathing. You're hot as well. But anyways, when you guys think of life and when you think about how things operate, we talked about structural racism, and I've talked about it, systemic racism, structural racism. However, where do you guys feel? Do you think that these things actually exist? I mean, do you see these things? Do you see elements of these things in the worlds that you live in? And I think that's probably a better way to ask. Not necessarily do you think that they exist, but do you see pieces of this or indications of this in the systems in which you guys operate? Because we operate in spaces together, but then there's a whole world that we are have different places.
I mean, let me take a stab at that maybe. And I think for sure racism in general still exists.
Okay.
I think that we've made progress in that area, but it still exists and probably will. Who knows? Maybe forever, because I think it's not just racism. People tend to be afraid of or want to separate by different groups. So liberals versus conservatives, black versus white.
Otherized people. Yes.
Otherized people. So that's just a natural tendency of human nature. I think, we've had this discussion before. I think historically, a lot of these systems were designed in a racist fashion. And so as we've evolved and tried to improve in that direction, there's still probably remnants of what had previously existed embedded in those systems that are working their way out of the system. I don't know if follow what I'm saying.
No, I do. I understand exactly.
Because I just don't think you can go from point A to point B with a huge gap instantaneously. That takes time. That takes years and years and years of time. And we're evolving away from that, is what I believe.
So is it possible? And I guess maybe would you agree with what he said, John?
I agree with elements of it.
All right, give me your understanding, your thoughts.
My understanding of structural racism, and I think that part of that comes from I've never had it defined for me in a way that I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. A lot of it just seems to be this nebulous thing, this boogeyman that can be pointed to as, oh, it's structural racism and we got to do away with it. Okay, and Mark and I, you've accused Mark and I of being similar in the, okay, how? What is the thing? Show me a piece of it that we can do away with here. And I don't know that anyone has pointed to one and said, here is a piece of it. Here's how we get rid of that piece of it.
How would you define? And this is changing. And you're younger. And one thing that I'll say is that.
How old are you, Jonathan? Just for
24.
24. You're the same age as my youngest. So.
And I think that what I think is promising is that younger generations, for the most part, because there are still pockets of people who are teaching foolishness to their kids, younger generations tend to not be so, I want to say, wound up by racism. They don't tend to take as much notice to race in terms of how it impacts their lives. Now, they do recognize the difference in race, and they identify with the benefits and the setbacks of race, but they don't really focus on race as a regular part of their life. Go ahead.
How I, as a young person, would put it is, we don't care. I don't care that
But you do care. You can't say that you don't care.
I care about you as a person.
Okay.
I don't care about you as a black person.
Okay.
That's the distinction I would make.
But I've heard the stories, and because I'm a part of the TikTok generation. Mark probably is like, he's not.
I'm not even involved in TikTok.
But I pay attention to things, and I pay attention to the types of things, and this is I think is great. I think that most people don't have an issue with black people, younger people, I'm going to say. However, they do recognize that if I, as a white man, take something that black people do and I do it like the black people do it, then I'm going to receive a different level of recognition and acceptance, probably even more so than the people who created it. And I think when we look at and this whole thing, we talked about TikTok probably a year or so ago. You and I did, John, and they're now are saying, hey, look, these content creators are not getting, the due that they are.
They need to copyright their work.
Well, I mean, TikTok is kind of like entertain. You're putting the dances together,
right?
And they're not getting the due. So they recognize that there is a benefit. And the crazy thing about it is that when I grew up, there was never a day in my life that I thought that there would be any genre of music that would ever surpass country music as being the top form of music or the highest selling form of music. And now we're looking at hip hop being the highest form of music. That is, it's crazy to me.
And country is despised by the younger generation. I'll say it's
really,
it's not despised, but it's like, oh, you listen to country music, that's a thing. It's like, oh,
but if you listen to country music now they're rapping now in country music.
Oh, yeah, it's become, modern country music.
Modern country,
isn't
that's
country
pop music.
Yeah,
I mean, country music to me is Loretta Lynn, who just passed away yesterday. God bless her soul.
Did she pass away? You said?
Yes, she did.
Wow.
At 90, Johnny Cash, those guys. That's real country music.
No, Johnny Cash, Walking the Line, and I get that.
Man in Black.
Yeah, I mean,
his version of Hurt is amazing.
It is.
Yeah.
We are the most eclectic, dyslexic, thinking group of people ever. But I think that this younger generation looks at the conversation topics on race very differently. I think that they recognize it, and we know that by some of the behavior that we've seen and we've reported. And they recognize, I think the young Americans recognize that there's a privilege with being white, even with how they do certain things. And there was a situation where a young girl was telling the black man she was going to call the police and tell the police something. This was in Central Park, and he was like, call the police, and he started videotaping her during the course of this thing, and her whole demeanor changed. So I think that they recognize it. I don't think that it is something that they fashion their lives around. And I think this clearly, I think a part of it is that history it usually is wasted on young people, and it doesn't really have an impact or an importance until they begin to look at their life, holistically. But anyways, so I was wondering where we are with that. So do we or do not believe in terms of structural or systemic racism, John?
That's an interesting question. I think It certainly did exist.
Okay.
I have not been convinced totally that it still does.
So you believe that it did exist?
I believe that it
Oh,
did.
for sure it did.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
I-
what? So okay, so this is my question.
Yeah.
So if it did
When did it
exist,
stop?
when did it stop, and how did we stop it?
Well, that's why I said it's an evolution. It's not, the remnants are still there, so it hasn't totally worked its way out of the system.
So if it's still in the system, then the system still has systemic racism.
But
It's-
is the system systemically racist?
I think that there, I'm at the threat of sounding like many people. There's some good officers. I think there are some people who have become enlightened and understand that really, and we've had this conversation, Mark, in other arenas, that systems are better when we are all a part of the system. But I think that there are parts of the system, upper echelon parts of the system, that continually hold on to a nepotist way of operating that generates that continues the system where people are not able to really fully have equity to all levels of systems.
I don't know that that's racial in nature. That's just human nature.
But I think if it started racial in nature and we never changed
that's
the
my
race,
point
then it
of
becomes
yeah. I mean, that's my point of it's evolving.
okay.
And so it historically was for sure. It was, to me, it was black and white.
All right, we got a statement by a lot of times it is indirectly, meaning a lot of systems are still operating on old systems. And if the old system is still in operation, then we got some issues with the system.
What system?
Yeah. What? Yeah. I mean,
What is-
because I don't
I
believe
mean,
laws that
a
are passed.
variety of systems. Like for instance, right now we're looking at, and this is a perfect example. If we were to look at the NBA versus the NFL,
Mhm.
there are some things that have changed in the NBA in terms of how they are able to deal with race and racism, and it's because a large portion of the breadwinners are African American. So we see changes in terms of how the leadership of teams are, coaching, things of that nature have all changed. When we look at the NFL has intrinsic problems because they got, cattle steering money.
What's their intrinsic problem?
Because they haven't been able to deal with the fact that most of their money comes from folks who have, were cattle stealers, not as cattle steers and things, but that old school money that is entrenched, and to hold a football team it's a really different thing to own a football team than a basketball
Isn't
team.
the NBA owners a bunch of rich white dudes too?
But if you look at the other areas of leadership, now I think ownership is key. But if you look, we do have black owners of NBA teams. And if you look at the leadership, you go to president. Now, this is a space I understand. You look at the presidents and the executive directors and the CEOs of teams and the president of the basketball operations in different areas. You will find a lot more blacks in those areas, still some inequity than you would in the arena of football.
And how does that impact you on a day-to-day basis?
Well, at this moment it doesn't, but when I work in professional sports, and that was a part of where I actually operated on a regular daily basis, who was in the office often had a great deal in terms of how I was received and how the issues that I addressed were often handled. Because go ahead, John.
So did the system stop being racist, or did it start being racist in your favor?
No, it did. Oh, that's a good question. Because I think that whenever equity happens, that is where white people go. They always feel as though it's racist in my favor. And so we're gonna have that kind.
Well, that's what I think the artifact of.
That's a good. No, but that's a good place for us. We're gonna address that, John. Thank you, John, for being brave enough to say that, because I think that you have addressed and said something that I have heard a million times before. And I'm just kind of like, where in the world do you get this? How does this make sense? But I think that makes sense. When I go in as a black man into a white system, I always have to do, dot I's, cross T's, and take care of business and this and that and the other, and may have a few hoops and not necessarily receive the same way. But when I go in and there are people who look like me in that space, they often understand the struggle that I had to do in order to get there, and often I'm treated a little bit different. We're going to pick this up on the other side of this commercial break. More with United Shades of Gray.
You're listening to United Shades of Gray on WSGW.
This is Kareem, and we're back with United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America. Before the break, John, you said something I thought that was very honest, and I thank you for saying it. And I want to read this comment, and then we're going to get to it. Stacy Crosby says it is definitely broken and needs to be fixed. The problem is we still have people who do not want to acknowledge that the problem is still there when it does not affect them. Keyword. So they are a part of the problem, as if they continue to say they truly care about all people and not color. Help make things universal then. Great point, Stacy. But John, you brought up the point. Was I feeling better because it wasn't racist against me, but it was racist toward me or for me? Is that how you said it?
Yeah,
in your favor, basically.
In my favor.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's a great point. Oftentimes, I think that is the big fear of white America. And it's funny because when I see it happen, they always say, well, that's reverse racism. I'm like, no, that's not reverse racism. That's called equity. And equity means that you take the issues that are working against anyone out of the system, and you put a system in where people can feel that they are part of the system and are welcome and comfortable to move. But I think that was an amazing point, and I think that pieces of that will come up in our conversation.
I think it's a thing you hear frequently, and I do think, as I was trying to say right before we cut the break, is in a certain sense it's an artifact of the system of quotas. And quotas were very popular and prevalent for a number of years.
I hate quotas.
I do too. And because what you're doing is giving someone else the opportunity to say, well, that person who looks different than me, and some quotas are by sex, some are by race, they got that job because they were this, not because they deserved it. And that's why I'm not a big believer in quotas.
And that's why I'm a big believer that I don't believe that white women are minorities. I don't believe that they're a minority group. We talk, because when you talk about affirmative action, and we talk about quotas, they kind of go hand in hand. The largest benefactor of affirmative action was white women. And I think
that still goes on today.
No,
I've worked at companies where they really focus on women, probably because it's the easiest thing to go after.
Yep.
To make sure women are at certain levels of management.
And I lean in for my women. So don't get me wrong. It's not like I'm some male chauvinist from, the 1920s. But the fact of the matter is, when we look at it, if we would take out the things that keep everyone from being on an even playing field, then we would have what I consider a more equitable solution to all things. So I want to ask this question. When were you first aware of your race?
So I actually thought about this for a few minutes before the show. It's interesting. I was born in Louisville, Kentucky.
Okay.
And my grandparents were fairly wealthy. And the first time I can remember a black person is my mom left my biological father when I was about a year and a half.
Not for a black man.
No.
Oh, I was about to say scandal.
No. We moved back in with my grandparents, but they had a black lady that was pretty much at the house all day, doing chores, doing whatever. I kind of had that remembrance.
When about was this, Mark?
I would have been about 2 or 3.
Okay.
But I didn't, she wasn't black or white. She was,
right.
I was just too young. And then I lived in Hawaii for a lot of years, for 3 or 4 years. And that's a very much a melting pot. So in a lot of ways, I was a minority in Hawaii.
Yeah.
But everybody is it's kind of a true melting pot. So everybody's mixed everything. The first time it really kind of hit me, I think I was in 6th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And we were in Norfolk, Virginia, and they used the military kids to integrate an inner city black school.
Okay.
And that was the first time it really kind of, I think, dawned on me, race and, the plights of an inner city. And because it was really.
What was it about that experience that made it
was definitely like us and them mentality, because here, they're from there. We're the military kids being bussed in.
Okay.
We were often picked on and beat up.
Okay.
I was a decent basketball player, so I was treated a little nicer than other people. But I remember on our last day leaving on the bus, our bus got stoned. by the kids that went to school there.
The kids that went to the school in Hawaii?
No, I'm in Norfolk, Virginia.
Norfolk, Virginia.
Yeah.
So were these black kids thrown in here?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
But the thing that really struck me, you talk about systematic racism. I believe it's got more to do with economics than today, but how poor the education was. Hawaii, I had come from Hawaii to there.
Right.
And Hawaii is not known for its education system either. And we were at least a year ahead. I was at least a year ahead of the kids that, I went into the advanced classes in 6th grade, and I was at least a year ahead. And the other thing that just struck me was, we had 3 kids who were waiting on their 16th birthday in 6th grade to basically drop out.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what about you, John? When were you first aware of race?
I literally just remembered this like 10 seconds ago.
Okay.
When I was in probably kindergarten, there was a kid who lived on my block, black kid. We were good friends. We played outside together all the time. But he invited me over to his house for the first time. And I remember walking in and going, it smells funny in here.
Uh-huh.
And just taking in the smell. And it's not that
what
it was
bad.
The smell? I don't know. Something was cooking.
Okay.
I think.
Okay.
But it was a smell that I never smelled anything like it before.
Okay.
And Mom was sitting in the living room, and
it was probably beans or black eyed peas or something.
I don't collard greens, ham hocks and collard
those
greens.
Are different smells. But go ahead.
But it was just one of those. This is a different house than my house. This is entirely different from anything I've ever experienced before. I think I think that might be more aware of culture than anything.
Culture, that's a culture. One of the things I remember about this school, went to the cafeteria, we had collard greens probably every other day.
You had collard greens in cafeteria?
Yeah, at the inner city school in Norfolk, Virginia, probably every other day. And I had never had collard greens before, and I forget there's a reason. They're high in something, but anyway. So
Mom said it was probably chitlins. She said chitterling. She said it correctly, but we call it chitlins.
Yeah.
I don't eat those. I don't eat chitlins. So there's a lot of things that I don't eat. But I'll tell you, when was I first? I had to really think about this. And even thinking now, when was I first? And I don't ever remember a time when I did not know that I was black. And I think that the programming started early, like with a lot of the things that I was saying. You got to understand that I grew up, just in about the mid 70s. And so things are happening. The 60s had just passed. My mom was a 50-something baby. And so I was born in a time when a lot of firsts were happening. A time when a lot of race conciliation and things were happening, movements. And so there was never a time when I did not know that I was a black kid, as far as I can remember. And I just remember my parents, and this is so funny. I remember my mom and my stepdad, they put me in, it was Our Lady of Mount Carmel School.
Catholic school.
It was Catholic school in the center of Saginaw. And I remember being in that school, and I remember being like one of the only black kids. And I remember these women that were dressed in black and white. Now that we know they're nuns. Yeah. And I just remember that experience. And I remembered that I was the other in that space. I didn't stay there long, but I just remember that. So I don't ever think there was ever a time when I did not recognize that there was something different about me than the other people that were around, and that race was.
I think it's what happens when you're the minority in anything. So the first time it really dawned on me is like when I was in the minority at this inner city school.
Have you ever been a minority before?
Not that I can recall, but probably at some point.
But like when I lived in Germany as an adult for a year, I felt alone and isolated, even though it's a bunch of white people. Mm-hmm. Because they had their own, like I would invite people over to my house and they'd speak German in my house. And it's like, I can't even participate in the conversation. And I always felt like alone and isolated. And I think it's easy because it's so prevalent here, racial, but it's part of human nature, kind of congregate with people that you're similar with, irrespective of race.
Were you gonna say something, John?
Yeah, I went to Germany for a month in high school, and I had studied German and German culture for 2 years at that point, but I still felt totally isolated. So I guess that's when I was in a minority.
I want to ask this question, and it goes along the line of what you both were saying. I remember that when I was at Michigan State, the lunch hour was like the most segregated period on campus.
Yep.
And I remember all of the white kids would always ask me, because I came from Carleton, which was not diverse, but it was white. So I was comfortable in white spaces. But they would always say, "Why do all the black people sit together?" And I didn't understand it. Like, I was like, "What's the problem?" And I've noticed not only in that space, but other spaces, it would appear that white people have problems when black people sit together or want to be together, or they congregate, and they say, well, that's not helping. We need to mix it up. What is the problem, or is there a problem? Because I continually hear that continually being asked of me. Why do they always want to just sit together? They don't want to mix it up when in spaces like that.
Well, I think it's, again, a human nature to sit with people you're comfortable with. So again, I would have sat with a bunch of Americans in Germany if there were some more Americans at this institute, because we would have things in common to talk about.
Right.
Now, I do. And so, but I understand the question, because if you want to be a part of something, it's as unfair as it is, it's almost incumbent upon you to try to fit in and be a part of that something.
But that's the thing. I don't want to be in that moment. I want to be a part of
and
those
that's
black
fine.
students sitting there.
But you can understand. I'd like to think you could understand the question. If you want to be part of this and included, then why are you segregating? It's easily to be viewed as you're segregating yourself.
But every other place when I was on campus everywhere else, all the white people be together all the time. They would talk together. They would swim to class. They would go tanning together. They play, volleyball together. And it would be no issue. And so,
because that's the norm. I mean, I understand your frustration.
Yeah.
And your point of view.
I'm not frustrated.
But I'm just giving you what the perspective.
Now I'm the angry black man, Mark?
No, not the angry black man. Because it's a little bit like, well, I'm the minority here. Shouldn't you invite me in?
I don't want to be invited anywhere. I want to be with black people in that moment.
Yeah.
And the thing that I'm saying, because I said this, and white folks got real mad when I said this. I said, sometimes I don't want to be with white people. I just want to be left alone.
Oh, so there is a difference in your mind.
Yeah, there is a difference to me. But what were you going to say, John?
You see white people going out together at different parts while you're at this school. Did black people go to the movies together and go?
The only time that black people really, there were two places, and they were both in cafeterias. One was like a casual dining, the other one was a formal cafeteria. That was the only time that you would see the black people just kind of like congregating to themselves.
Yeah, again, I was at Notre Dame, and it was 90-something% white.
Right.
But they pretty much had their own community, really.
Yeah.
They'd socialize together. They'd eat together.
And I think in that space, and this is because at the same time, and I want to say this because I think it's important, at this time, because I had been in white spaces, predominantly white spaces. I told you, as a preschool, kindergarten, I remember being at a Catholic school. So I'd been in predominantly white spaces my entire life. So at 17 to go on campus, and for the first time, like, see all of these black people, I was like, wow, there's more out there. I'm not the only one. It was a celebration of being able to have people who look like me, who were experiencing and there was nothing to it. And it was funny because I would invite my white friends to come and sit with us in those spaces, and they're like, I'm not going over there. Like something was going to happen to them. And I began to recognize there's a difference. Would white people be able to handle an America where tomorrow you woke up and they were the minority on this planet? The majority of the teachers that you had were black. The majority of the politicians that you saw were black. The majority of owners of companies, and see what could you imagine? We should do a short film about that. What would that be like? Because I am comfortable in white spaces because I've been.
Well, you had to grow up that way.
Yeah. And it's funny because my white friends were uncomfortable sitting at a cafeteria where there was predominantly black students do. Well, how do you think you would fare in that situation, John?
Why are you throwing this at me?
Because you're a young guy.
Well, I'm just thinking.
He's like, why are you throwing this at me?
You're throwing paradoxes at me, and I'm trying to work through them. But
no,
no,
they're super hypothetical. I mean, ultimately, people
they're super hypothetical.
Here's what I think.
But
I think people adjust. So you grew up, you learned, you adjusted.
Have you ever had to adjust to anything like that?
Like I said, I went to an inner city school where I was a small minority and got beat up a lot. And so, yeah, I adjusted. You adjust. People adjust.
Mark, I want to know. I think
I would adjust. I think I would adjust probably within a month. But that comes back to my upbringing. I went to a new school every year for 6 years.
Now we always had like there's always one kid that can't get out the ghetto. That can't get out and he became, he was white chocolate. It was always the nickname white chocolate. But I always often ask myself those things, and I think that they're really interesting. We think like, I would just
because I just don't think we're that different. Yes, we have different cultures.
We're very different.
We have different cultures. We have different likes. We have different. But the reality is what you want out of life and what I want out of life and what we want for our families and our friends is basically the same.
No, I think that the human desires and the things that we desire are different, but white folks and black folks are real different. Haven't you ever seen Scary Movie?
No.
Yes.
No.
In fact, that kid that
have you seen Scream, a Scary Movie?
That kid that I went to his house in kindergarten. That's what I was going there to do. His brother had rented Scary Movie.
Yeah,
that's what we were watching.
So I think that we
Don't
are.
show that to kindergartners.
I think we're very.
Those are. I would argue those are cultural differences.
No, I think that we as people are very different. I think we're very different as people, but I think we desire the same thing in terms of our humanistic desires and what we desire in life.
We're very different as people, and we have very different cultures. What would that world look like? What world would I be waking up in?
Soul Plane.
Soul Plane. Well, first of all, we ain't rocking rims on everything, and I think that those are societal norms. But if we were to take a look at something like that, right? And I think that we're having a tongue-in-cheek moment about that. But if we look at just recently, I mean, we're talking probably in the past 5 to 7 years, like braids and natural hairstyles for Black Americans are okay for us to wear in predominantly white spaces.
That was the case before.
No.
I remember Oscar Gamble rocking the afro, like out to here, and his helmet would sit on top of his head. Like
what did he do?
He played baseball for
exactly.
the Yankees.
He was an athlete. Yeah. But I'm
talking
about
all the fashion, the big afros and everything.
And that was fashion. Yeah. But when we were able to work in white spaces, we had to do something called conformity. We had to conform to those spaces.
Everybody does, whether you're white or black.
But what I'm saying is that the conforming for white America is conforming to a standard that white America sets. Mm-hmm. Conforming for Black America means that I am like removing the blackness. I am actually changing parts of who I am to fit into a system that is not just kind of like, that has nothing to do with me. And so when we look at how racism operates in these spaces, I think that these are great depictions of how we are finally getting to the understanding, I think, with some awareness, understanding of what biases are. The fact that if I come in and I used to hear that people say the term nappy, but it's kinky. It's a different type of
hair. What is nappy?
Well, nappy is something that ain't happy, but the word is kinky. The appropriate word is kinky. When we look at African hair, certain textures.
So the natural afro, or is it treated at all?
No, just natural hair. Just natural hair. Like for instance, my hair, I don't have much of a kink because when you look through the generations of my bloodline, it has been filtered down. So there, it's not completely, but I mean, but even when I look at people that are from Ethiopia, they have different styles of hair. Mm-hmm. And so some hair is kinky and some hair is very straight. I mean, I know some Black African women from Kenya and other places who have the most beautifully straight, just silky hair. That's how their hair is.
I thought it was always straightened. Okay.
No. But that's the misconception that that we don't have, that hair textures and things are a particular way. But what I want to say, and you're right, Larry Rodardi says we all bleed the same color. Larry, you are absolutely right. When I think about La Razas, I think about the fact that we all bleed the same color. That is what is so defeating about the fact that we treat each other so differently because of the shells that are on the outside. As Mark said, I think our desires for what we want in life are very similar. Larry, you said it, our internal workings are exactly the same. We can change blood, to save one another's lives, but we cannot get over this external thing, that shell that is differently tinted in terms of who we are as people. All right, so have you ever thought about the idea of what you would do, and what would be your legacy be in terms of your commitment to changing the issues or the things that exist? And no, Mark, I know that you were kind of on that journey when you were leaving as a CEO, but what would you want your legacy be in dispelling or doing away with these issues on race?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons I wanted to do this show, is to kind of, I think, again, I come back to, I hate to be redundant, my thesis that what ultimately at our core, we're really not that different. And what scares us is what we don't know. And so anything I can do to get people to intermingle and get to know each other across racial boundaries so that they understand that we're not that different, we're not that scary. And because I think once you get to know someone or people of a different culture or race and understand who they are and that they're really good people and they really at their core are very similar, these things tend to melt away. And so anything I can do to bring people together, to get them to know each other and understand each other, is what I'm trying to do at this point.
That's good. What about you, Jonathan?
So you threw a hypothetical at me earlier, so I'll throw one back.
Okay.
I think that the biggest problem when it comes to talking about race and the idea of systematic racism and all that right now is that there is no solid foundation upon which these conversations happen regularly. There's no common ground where, without a whole lot of background, one person can talk to another person about this kind of thing. If somehow I could help make that foundation exist to where, okay, we can have these conversations on an even playing field, I'd be happy.
All right. Well, first of all, I disagree with the fact that the foundation doesn't exist or the platform doesn't exist. I think it may not be clearly defined in terms of you understanding what exactly we're talking about, but I think that it exists, and I think that there are real things, tangible things that we could point to in terms of examples. But to your point taken, I think maybe clearly defining some things better may be a great place to start. One of the things that I really hope that I would be able to do, and as we have these conversations, is I think that most white people want to be at a place, and this is kind of where I feel that we are all equal today. And that race is not an issue today. But the problem that Black America has with a situation that says, okay, you're 100 yards down the road and we're going to be equal now, is the fact that it doesn't deal with how do we become equitable in our equality. And the fact that in order for certain things to be okay today, that means that there has to be some conversation about what do we need to do to make things not only equitable at the moment, not only equality exists, but equal. Equitable and equal, I think sometimes in that moment would mean they're very different. And it requires us to make some changes to where things are. And for Black America, and I don't speak for all Blacks, but I speak for myself, my biggest issue has always been that we want to start from ground zero today without any real solutions toward how we bring and repair the things that have been egregious against Blacks historically. I want to thank you guys for tuning in today. I always love having these conversations with you guys. I leave here and I'm always thinking about how we can better connect with one another and make changes for everyone who's out there. For those that are in social media stream, thank you for tuning in. Like, tag, and share this conversation. And as always, take care of yourselves and each other. This is Mark, John, and Kareem signing off. United Shades of Gray, Conversations of Race in America. God bless you all. Grace and peace.